On a cold winter morning on January 2, 1983, 28-year-old Nancy McEvers, née Pepper, died in her home in the Durham neighborhood of Washington County in Oregon. No foul play was suspected, and it was believed she took her own life. The case went cold as it was believed to be a suicide, and the family tried making their peace with Nancy's death. After 40 years, new evidence came into light that changed the entire course of the case. The mystery of Nancy McEvers' case finally reached its conclusion in 2023. What had happened to Nancy that day? What new evidence led police to find the answers after 4 decades? Welcome back to Mysterious Hook, where we shed light on under-the-radar cases across the country. Today, we are looking at the 40-year-old cold case of Nancy McEvers that has finally received closure in 2023. Washington County makes up the Portland metropolitan area and is the second most populous county in Oregon, which has 36 total counties. Away from the bustling cities, the breathtaking scenery and the lush greenery that surrounds the area is one of the main reasons why people find comfort in the Washington County of Oregon and like to settle here. The hills and mountains that envelop the majestic landscape, friendly people, and the old-fashioned homes are the charm of this region. Home to about 600,000 people, it is the most populous Washington County in America. With a culturally vibrant community and a myriad of options for recreational activities like hiking, nature walking, and fishing, it offers a haven for people seeking to get away from the rush of daily life. But sadly, it also holds dark secrets, and it is here that our case takes place today. Nancy McEvers, née Pepper, was born in Oregon in 1955. Nancy's mother, Lenore Pepper, now 97, was used to hearing the words sweet and beautiful when people spoke about her daughter. Everyone, whether they knew her for years or had just met her, referred to her as a friendly person. Nancy was close to both of her sisters. Being the middle child, she was loved by both her elder sister, Janet Aglitis, and her younger sister, Diane Grill. She often acted as a mediator between her mother and the sisters. Her loving and caring nature, coupled with her outgoing personality, was why people loved interacting and spending time with her. She had always been the caring one among her sisters, and her maternal instincts were really strong. So when she got married to Randy McEvers and had a son, she really enjoyed being a mom. It was one thing that everyone knew about her: she loved being a mom. Nancy's love towards her own child and for her sisters carried the sisters' childhood dreams forward. All the 3 sisters had planned on raising their kids together. Coincidentally, the 3 sisters had their first children within 18 months of each other. The plan of giving them a happy and close-knit upbringing was already in the works. But in a tragic twist, it was to be left incomplete in the end. January 2, 1983 was a cold winter's morning in beautiful Washington County in Oregon. Around 10:38 a.m., police received a call from Randall McEvers. Randall seemed to be distraught that his wife had taken her own life. Washington County Sheriff's Office deputies reached the 17300 block of Southwest Rivendell Drive located in the Durham neighborhood, which was not a part of Washington County then, but was incorporated into it after 1983. The police officers, assisted by the Oregon State Police Medical Examiner's Office, Oregon State Police Crime Lab, and Washington County Medical Examiner's Office, found the body of Nancy McEvers, née Pepper, with a gunshot wound to the head. Despite the nature of the wound and very low chances of Nancy making it out alive, paramedics rushed to get Nancy to a nearby hospital. She was almost immediately pronounced dead. On the surface, the death of Nancy McEvers checked out as a suicide case. Investigators found and seized a Smith & Wesson revolver from the crime scene. It was only when the police started interrogating people that inconsistencies started showing up. When the alleged suicide had happened, it was just Nancy who had been home with her 30-year-old husband and 1-year-old son. The crime scene made the detectives ask the question whether the suicide happened in a closed space or if Randall was a witness to it. The interrogation that followed raised the red alarms. The police had to wait for forensic reports to take the investigation forward. When they got the reports back, the case of Nancy McEvers, née Pepper, turned out to be a lot more complex than the police had anticipated. Following the autopsy report, forensic tests, and ballistic tests, it did not take long for investigators to understand that there was something else at play here. The medical reports by the Oregon State Police Crime Lab soon revealed that the case could not have been a suicide. There were way too many things that were off. A person who has recently fired a gun would have residue on their hands and clothes, which is tested by lifting samples and processing them to check for fused particles of lead, antimony, or barium. The first inconsistency was that Nancy had no gunshot residue on her hands, but it did not prove anything directly. This is because the residue can only be detected within 6 to 8 hours of the shot being fired, and it can easily be washed away from being in contact with other things. So while it was an important discovery, it was not enough. The second inconsistency arose when the medical examiners reported that Nancy's wound was too broad for it to be a suicide case. The wider the wound, the greater the distance of the gun's muzzle from the person. Further, it was also mentioned in the report that the charred particles on her clothes meant that Nancy was struggling or trying to defend herself. Nancy had been home alone with her husband Randall and her 1-year-old child. Randall had not mentioned the presence of any other person or instances of forced entry, so naturally, the police had found their prime suspect. Detectives initiated their interrogation with Randall. After giving them basic details, he went on to confess that Nancy and him were struggling over the gun, and during that chaos, he didn't remember who had pulled the trigger. When the police prodded more and asked the questions again, Randall retracted his statement, changed the story, and presented a new version to the officers. He told police that he had just entered the room when Nancy was pulling the trigger. There was no struggle possible as she had already shot herself by the time Randall walked into the room and realized what was happening. Both these versions were exactly opposite to one another. It was important to find out what had really happened, so the detectives approached the people who were close to Nancy, including her relatives, friends, and co-workers. Every one of them suspected Randall to have some kind of involvement in her death. The police had just wanted a little more evidence to finally make a sense of the situation and build a strong case against Nancy's husband. So the police called in Randall for questioning again 2 days after the initial interrogation. They could not get a confession out of him. Randall's parents then showed up at the police station and assured them that their son was ready to go through a polygraph test to highlight his innocence. But Randall was a no-show for the scheduled test. By April, he had entirely stopped cooperating with the police. Without any other leads and new evidence, the police marked the case of Nancy McEvers' alleged suicide as cold. A week after Nancy's funeral, her family members were informed that no foul play suspicions had led anywhere and there were no further leads in the case. So the family tried their best to put this dark chapter behind them. After her death in 1983, not only was her son deprived of all the love that Nancy had to give, but also her entire family changed forever. They were deeply affected by the news. Nancy was such a huge part of their lives that they were never the same after she was gone from their lives. When Nancy's family found out about her death, they could not believe it. She was a cheerful and easygoing person who loved every bit of raising her child. To think that Nancy shot herself dead with her son still in the house was unbelievable to her family. She would never have done anything like this, which would separate herself from her son in such a final manner. Lenore Pepper, Nancy's mother, had her doubts about Nancy's death. She suspected Randall, but could not say anything about it. She had already lost her daughter, and after the police officially told them that there was no foul play suspected, Lenore Pepper let her suspicions die. With no charges against him, Randall was responsible for raising his 1-year-old son. Lenore did not want to stir up something she did not know how to handle. She had strong doubts about Randall, but stayed silent to protect her grandson, just in case her confusions and questions turned out to be false. Not just Nancy's mother, but everyone who knew Nancy thought that it could not have been a suicide. But without any confirmation from the investigators, their doubts remained doubts. Nancy's sister believed that it was a terrible accident that was never meant to happen. She was just 28 when she died. Her dreams, her aspirations, and her entire life disappeared in a second. The case of Nancy McEvers had been closed for so long that no one expected it to be reopened by the detectives in August 2022. The officers assigned to the Violent Crimes Unit were in charge of the cold case investigations. When they went through the file of Nancy McEvers, they knew that justice had to be served. The world did not even know that Nancy hadn't committed suicide. She was murdered in cold blood. Before moving forward, the police went over the previously collected evidence. Detective Anel Sarek, part of the investigation team, called the case poorly investigated. The police work of the officers in the 80s was not thorough. And since the detective in charge from 1983 had already passed away, there was no way of knowing why the officers let this case go cold for so many years. The evidence taken in 1983 was retested by the Washington County Sheriff's Office Forensic Science Unit, and the forensic report came out to be exactly as similar to the previous one. The possibility of Nancy's death being a suicide was completely ruled out. The police now believed that this case had an angle of domestic violence that resulted in the death of Nancy McEvers. Investigators did not release a description in the media detailing which new leads were explored due to concern for the family's privacy. The police carried out interviews with around 20 people, some of whom were deputies, detectives, firefighters, and family members who were either present at the scene in 1983 or were closely involved in the case. Even after 40 years, Nancy's story was alive. It became evident as additional evidence came to light after all these years. Nancy's file mentioned that when the police were interviewing people who knew Nancy and Randall, they revealed that he had been planning to kill Nancy because she wanted to get a divorce and leave him. Anel Sarek, one of the investigators on the case, showed his confusion about no action being taken in the 80s despite direct evidence. He said, "Why they did the things they did, I can't tell you." But finally, everything was falling in place, and Randall was slowly but surely turning out to be the prime suspect in the murder of Nancy McEvers. At this time, Randy was living in Tigard, a city in Oregon, 10 miles south of Portland. The police approached him at his house in January 2023 and questioned him about the incident. He told the detectives that he had gone through hypnotherapy to make him forget everything related to that day. The police by now had enough leads, and they wanted Nancy's family to receive real closure. So after their interview with Randall, they referred the case to the district attorney's office in Washington County for their review. The information that Nancy's family had been living with for 40 years turned out to be false. While there had been enough twists in the case of Nancy McEvers till this point, police were shocked to find out that Randall had taken his own life on February 8, 2023. He also wrote a note in which he denied any responsibility for Nancy's death. Although the DA's office could not review the case after Randall's death, the police believed that this was a closure in itself. After the death of their prime suspect, Nancy McEvers' case is now finally closed. It came as a shock when the police reached out to Lenore in August 2022. She could not believe that her suspicions about her daughter's death had been true all along. Nancy's mother, Lenore, showed her gratitude to the police officers for being able to see it through to the end. She wished Nancy's father had been alive to finally witness their daughter's story getting closure. Getting to know about Randall's suicide, Lenore Pepper said, "I feel like we got justice, but like I said, in a very strange way. But at my age, I don't know if I could have gone to a trial every day, so we have to accept that. That's all we can do." Nancy was loved by all, so the news of her vicious murder stirred multiple emotions. Her sisters stated that they felt every emotion all over again. But the entire family believed that Randall's suicide was as much evidence as his actual trial in court. He denied having any involvement in Nancy's death, but his own death turned out to be an acceptance that Nancy's family had been waiting for 4 decades. "We're exempt from going through a trial and being drugged," said Nancy's younger sister, Diane Grill. "It was hard. It's been tough for 40 years. As my sister said, we've got the answers now because we need to finish it." Nancy's family is sharing the news with more of her loved ones, and they are planning to conduct a memorial service for her. After the shock of learning that their beloved Nancy had been murdered after 40 years, they have developed new grief and trauma. Nonetheless, the entire family was grateful to the investigation team who served justice to her. For 40 years, Nancy's family believed that she had ended her own life. Little did they know that their initial doubts about her death were all valid and led directly to the answer that Nancy's husband had killed her. Although the case has been closed now, Washington County Sheriff's Office deputies are still open for more information on Nancy McEvers' death. They want anyone with new and relevant information to step forward and call detectives at 503-846-2700 to serve justice to Nancy, who was believed to be dead by choice for all these years. Do you believe that Randall killed his wife? Why didn't the detectives in the 80s make a solid case against Randall? On June 26, 2004, a woman's remains were found on a hill near a picnic area at a Missouri rest stop along the Interstate 70. The remains had no head or hands or legs and was only a torso. In such a state, it was impossible to identify whose torso it could be. The manner in which the body had been dismembered shocked even the most experienced of investigators. Even though a huge team of detectives worked on the case, they weren't able to crack it for 19 long years. But who was the victim? And why were they murdered in such a manner? Today's story takes us to Wright City, Missouri, a charming Midwestern destination with a population of only 4,300 people. Its location along the busy Interstate 70 has made it a hub for transportation and logistics businesses, attracting entrepreneurs and visitors from across the state. However, Wright City is much more than just a transportation hub. This historic downtown area features unique shops and delightful eateries, making it an inviting spot to unwind after a busy day of exploring. The city's highly regarded school district is committed to education, offering top-notch schools for children. Wright City's mix of small-town charm and modern convenience makes it a destination with something for everyone. But like all good things, it too had its dark secrets hidden away from the world. June 26, 2004 was a serene day in Wright City, Missouri. However, the city was stunned when a maintenance worker stumbled upon a gruesome discovery in a rest area along the bustling Interstate 70. While trimming the brush, the maintenance worker noticed something suspicious. Out of curiosity, he went to investigate it further and ended up uncovering a decapitated torso. The sight sent shockwaves down his spine. He immediately called the police and informed them about what he had found. It was a discovery that shocked the town of Wright City. The human remains had no head or limbs and was simply a torso. Since the remains were found in a secluded area, investigators theorized that the body was dumped in this area, but the victim was most likely killed elsewhere. But what they found provided more questions than answers. The torso was dressed in a simple black bra, and there were scars from a previous appendectomy and C-section visible on her body, but not much else. All the investigators found at the crime scene were some DNA samples on the victim's body and a knife. After an initial examination of the crime scene, her torso was taken for an autopsy, but because the body was without hands, legs, and a head, it eliminated almost all possible ways in which she could be identified, making it impossible to know who the victim was and how she ended up in that place. As there was not much evidence found at the crime scene, police were relying on the autopsy report for more information. But unfortunately, even the autopsy report could not pinpoint an exact cause of death. It was suggested that the neck had been ruthlessly severed, but it was impossible to clearly say how she met her demise. Initially, it was believed that she was a victim of organ trafficking, but they found that no organs had been removed from the body, which indicated that the murder was not to steal her organs. The case left investigators scratching their heads as they tried to piece together the puzzle of her final moments. The discovery set off a major investigation, with many detectives working tirelessly to find any leads that would help solve it. This was the start of a lengthy investigation which would puzzle police for many years to follow. As a first step, investigators interviewed people who lived in the nearby area and urged them to jog their memory in search of something unusual they might have witnessed in the area around the time of the discovery of the remains. Some witnesses said that they saw a white utility van in the area the day before the torso was discovered. But while that information looked promising, it did not generate any new leads. Even after a thorough investigation, the police could not come up with any suspects. Without much evidence or suspects, the case eventually went cold. The investigation was reignited in 2014 when Lieutenant Matt Schmutz of the Warren County, Missouri Sheriff's Department took over the case and started to investigate missing persons in the area that matched the characteristics of the victim. The following year, he began to talk with investigators in Madison County, Illinois on a missing persons case that shared similar traits. Then, in April 2006, a person who could have been from the woman's family, whose name was Brian Barker, went to the Warren County Sheriff's Department when he realized that the torso could be his sister's. He provided DNA for an identity test, but the testing was inconclusive. Brian refused to give up on finding his sister's killer, even when all hope seemed lost. Even though his initial attempt to provide DNA evidence failed, he didn't give up. After years of failed attempts to identify the remains found in rural Missouri, a new lead was finally uncovered. This lead was Ashley Kinnear, who was likely the oldest daughter of the woman, and who was contacted due to information Brian gave to the police. An expert suggested getting DNA samples from the woman's relatives, including her oldest daughter Ashley Kinnear and 2 other siblings. Thankfully, they agreed to provide the DNA for testing, which ultimately led to a breakthrough in the case, and in 2016, the Missouri lab found a match. Finally, the identity of the torso was revealed. It was stated that the victim was Deanna Denis Howland, also known by her aliases Deanna Froelich or Deanna Kinnear. Records show that Deanna was married more than once and had multiple aliases, including Deanna Barker, Deanna Kinnear, and Deanna Froelich. She had at least 2 children and was born in Belleville, Illinois in the United States. Despite her struggles and the difficulties she faced in life, Deanna Denis Howland was a person with hopes and dreams, loved by her family and missed by those who knew her. Her tragic death at the hands of a murderer is a reminder that every person, no matter their struggles, is deserving of justice and respect. Deanna was a woman who lived a troubled life, battling addiction and often living as a transient. She was known to frequent areas of Illinois such as Granite City and East St. Louis, and was recognized by many as a prostitute who had problems with the consumption of illegal drugs. Despite her struggles, Deanna was a caring mother to her children. Her daughter Ashley Kinnear remembers her as a loving and devoted parent. Ashley became concerned about her mother's well-being when her mother failed to show up for a school play that she had promised to attend in May 2004, and there was no further contact after that. Deanna's disappearance was out of character, and her daughter knew something was wrong when her mother didn't even call her on her birthday, something she never missed. For all this time, Ashley had been confused and disheartened regarding her mother's disappearance. She had tried to contact every possible person she could think of or knew about, but still she had gotten no information about her mother. The only thing she could do was wait for her mother to show up one day. From this, it is clear that despite her troubles, Deanna was clearly a caring and loving mother who always made an effort to stay in touch with her children. After years of investigation and diligent work, authorities finally made a breakthrough in the case of Deanna Dennis Howland in 2022. The suspect was found with the help of a DNA report. The DNA that investigators got from Deanna's body and from the knife which was found at the crime scene was what finally helped them crack the case. The defendant, whose identity has been released, was linked through his DNA evidence that investigators found on Deanna's body. It took years of testing and analysis through forensic genetics to make the connection, but the evidence was finally conclusive in 2022, which led them to a 63-year-old man. The man was identified as Mike Anthony Clardy, a longtime resident of Maryland Heights, Missouri. The quiet life that Mike Clardy and his wife were leading came to an abrupt end when police arrested Clardy on January 10, 2023 at their Maryland Heights home. This wasn't the first time Clardy's life was disrupted, as he had an accident in 2004 that rendered him legally blind. But this time, it was due to his alleged involvement in this heinous crime. The suspect was able to hide from the police for 2 decades, but was finally identified. Despite these accusations, court records show that Clardy was not linked with any other killings and did not have a criminal record. But now, Clardy is facing second-degree murder charges in relation to the killing of Deanna Howland. The next step was to uncover the whole truth behind the heinous crime. Clardy, who had been compliant with the arrest, was brought in for interrogation. As the detectives probed deeper into the matter, they questioned him about the details of the murder, and more crucially, about the remains that were found. In 2023, after almost 2 decades, justice was finally served for Deanna Dennis Howland as her killer Mike Clardy was charged for her murder. The St. Louis Prosecuting Attorney's Office filed an indictment stating that Clardy confessed to killing Howland in June 2004, as well as scattering her remains across multiple locations. Despite his initial denial of involvement, Clardy reportedly admitted to officers that he murdered Howland after a disagreement in his home. He admitted to spreading the victim's remains throughout the St. Louis and Warren counties. He is currently being held on a bond of $1 million in Warren County as the investigation continues. The announcement of the indictment by the Major Case Squad of Greater St. Louis marked a significant breakthrough in a joint investigation between multiple law enforcement agencies. If found guilty, Clardy may face a lengthy prison sentence of up to 40 years. Finally, the truth is being unveiled and justice may finally be served for Deanna Howland nearly 2 decades later. After the heart-wrenching news of her untimely death, Howland's loved ones never lost hope that the perpetrator of the heinous crime would one day be brought to justice. And finally, after years of tireless investigation, Clardy was apprehended and the veil of mystery surrounding Howland's murder was lifted. As the sheriff's office released details of the case, the community was left in shock and disbelief, learning of the DNA evidence and other gruesome details that had been withheld for years. Though they will never have her back, her friends and family can find solace in the fact that justice has finally been served. At a press conference in St. Louis, Deanna Howland's daughter Keysha expressed her gratitude towards everyone who had taken an interest in her mother's story. It was an emotional moment as she thanked the crowd for their support and for not giving up on her mother's case. Keysha revealed how she always knew that something had happened to her mother and that she would never have abandoned her family without a word. She appreciated the fact that people were interested in getting to know who her mother was and the impact she would have had on their lives if she were still alive. It is clear that Deanna was a kind and devoted woman who meant the world to her loved ones. Keysha's words touched the hearts of many, reminding us all of the importance of not forgetting the lives of those lost and the loved ones they leave behind. The case of Deanna Howland is a tragic reminder of the impact that violent crimes can have on individuals, families, and communities. The arrest and confession of Clardy may bring closure to those affected by Howland's murder, but it can never fully undo the harm that was done. Ultimately, it is up to the justice system to hold the perpetrator accountable for their actions.
On June 12, 2005, a 21-year-old Ashley Parlier of Battle Creek, Michigan, had an argument with her parents and left the house. She disappeared without a trace and was never seen again, with everyone including family and friends under suspicion for years. The case did not lead anywhere for over a decade. It took 18 years for the police and the Parlier family to get answers that they were seeking all along. So, where did Ashley Parlier go? Could it have been an instance of foul play? Battle Creek is a small city in southwest Michigan that not only offers inviting neighborhoods and friendly communities, but also a booming industry and incredible growth opportunities for its citizens. Known as the birthplace of the cereal industry, Battle Creek occupies a strategic location between states and a major highway that facilitates a steady inflow of tourists for its beautiful landscapes. Downtown Battle Creek is a thriving community with a strong suburban feel. Battle Creek, known for its natural beauty and recreational opportunity, is one of the best places in Michigan to raise a family. From the same thriving and friendly community, a 21-year-old tragically disappeared in 2005 without a trace. On October 16, 1983, Russell and Sherry Parlier had their second child, a baby girl who they later named Ashley. Ever since her childhood, Ashley had been a shy and quiet person. She also was very naive and innocent. When she got older, she did not make a lot of friends. Ashley's older sister, Nicole Campen, recalled that her sister was very trusting. She said, "One of the biggest things I remember about her is she was so trusting and she really just saw good in people. She wanted people to be what she thought the world should be, and that was good." Ashley had beautiful brown eyes and brown hair, and her smile with crooked teeth was really pretty. Ashley also had a mild mental disability that made her function at the level of a teenager between the ages of 12 and 14. Despite her problems, she managed to live life enthusiastically. She graduated from Battle Creek Central High School and got a job at the nearest Taco Bell restaurant in the 800 block of Northeast Capitol Avenue. She wanted to get her own car, for which she had been saving up some money from whatever she earned at Taco Bell. But sadly, Ashley, a young woman who wanted the world to be a happy place, had tragedy waiting for her just around the corner. And despite her kind and gentle nature, the world was not kind to her. 21-year-old Ashley Parlier had a lean build. At about 5 feet 9 inches tall, she weighed only 100 pounds. So on June 12, 2005, when her parents noticed that she appeared to have a bump, they were noticeably worried. After all, Ashley was too innocent both by nature and in her mental capacity. They feared for her health, so they wanted her to see a doctor and get prenatal treatment if she decided to carry the baby. Ashley had a huge argument with her parents about the entire incident and left the house upset. She took off from her house in Bedford Township in the Urbandale neighborhood with no car, driver's license, cell phone, or credit card. However, she did have some cash amounting to about $700 with her. The family wanted to give her the time she needed to cool off, but Ashley never returned home. When minutes turned into hours and hours turned into days, the Parlier family panicked as they knew something was not right. Initially, they had believed that Ashley would spend a couple of days at one of her friend's house and cool down and then return home to them. But when she hadn't returned after multiple days and they were unable to get in touch with her, they were left with no choice but to report her missing to the police. The police did not have much evidence to work with or leads to follow, so they released Ashley Parlier's picture to the public, along with her physical description, in the hopes this would help them generate some leads. Along with her physical description and weight and build, they also released details of the outfit she was wearing when she went missing. She was last seen in a checkered shirt and a pair of blue jeans paired with brown leather sandals. It was not long after the police got numerous tips about sightings, especially in the Howland Lake area. The family heaved a sigh of relief. They hoped that she would be found and they could then persuade Ashley to come back home. But the police soon gave the Parlier family bad news. All the sightings were false and could not be confirmed, so wherever Ashley was, she was not yet ready to come back home. The investigation reached stage 2, and the officers' initial doubt landed on Cherie and Russell, Ashley's parents, who had taken a while before finally filing a complaint. Her father agreed to take a polygraph test and was cleared. but Ashley's mother, Cherie, declined to take the polygraph test. The important thing to mention here is that Cherie had already started to show signs of Huntington's disease, which was properly diagnosed a few years later. Ashley's sister, Nicole, clarified that not coming home for this long was definitely unusual behavior because Ashley had never done anything like that. But the family had believed that since they had a pretty big argument before she left, she was probably blowing off steam at a friend's place. They had assumed that she would come back home by the weekend and they would be able to work through the situation. Nicole said that her parents were the last two to see her at that time, so the police had obvious concerns. She added, "Again, we are a small-town Michigan family. We never thought that this would be a 16-year ordeal of trying to figure out where a daughter and sister is." The police also tried searching for her then estranged boyfriend. At some point in months before she disappeared, they had broken up, but police and Ashley's family believed that she was carrying his child. At the time of the interrogation, he had another girlfriend who was also pregnant. He was not ruled out as a suspect, but the detectives could not find any evidence against him. Ashley's friends and close relatives were also questioned, but again no clue came into light. However, another angle emerged. The officers learned that Ashley may have been suicidal. The police suspected that if she had taken her own life, then they would be able to find the body somewhere. So, the police actively searched for her body. Nothing of substance could be found. Then they theorized that maybe Ashley was robbed, but there had been no change in her social security number all the while she was gone. By now, the police were ready to give the Parlier family more bad news. They informed her family that they suspected foul play, and it was likely that Ashley was already dead. They also assured the family that they were not giving up on her. They continued an extensive search to find Ashley Parlier, but the case eventually went cold. Over the span of the next 18 years, several officers from Battle Creek Police Department worked on Ashley's case. Her disappearance became a mystery for the whole department because they kept finding persons of interest, but there was never any valid evidence against any of them to make them a suspect. In the year 2020, when they suspected that she might have been murdered outside of Battle Creek City, they assigned the case to the Sheriff's Department. It was only in 2021, when they were least expecting it, that they had a breakthrough in the case. Having gone nowhere for around 16 years, the case had turned cold. But then something happened that would change everything. Pennsylvania law enforcement contacted Calhoun County officers when they unexpectedly found a lead in Ashley Parlier's case. In January 2021, Pennsylvania detectives were questioning 44-year-old serial killer Harold David Hallman III for the murder of two different women, Tiana Phillips and Erica Schultz. At that time, Hallman asked the officers if they could merge all three cases of Phillips, Schultz, and Parlier because he did not want a trial. The police had not mentioned Ashley Parlier anywhere during the conversation. In fact, they were not sure what he was talking about. So they further interrogated him about the Parlier case, and what they found was shocking. The police had not mentioned Ashley Parlier anywhere during their conversations. In fact, they were not sure what he was talking about. So they further interrogated him about the Parlier case, and what they found was shocking. It was not just a lead, but a full-blown confession.
You wanted to see what it felt like?
In a way, yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was a curiosity of mine, of course. It's part of the reason it happened, yes. That's part of the reason. And I did. Nothing, no drug can ever equate to that experience. Like, there's nothing out there. It's just, your mind is just, well, for me, it was just gone.
The detectives immediately got in touch with the Calhoun County Police Department to inform them about the new development in the case. When Calhoun County PD took over, their investigative efforts revealed that Hallman had lived in Battle Creek between 2002 and 2009, and he had been in touch with Parlier. Police learned that Hallman had been in contact with Parlier after Ashley had the argument at home. She visited him at his home in Emmett Township, Michigan. Ashley told him that her parents wanted to get a pregnancy test. Later, Ashley and Hallman ended up in an argument, so Hallman knocked her unconscious after assaulting her, and then took her to the Pennsylvania hills, where he bashed her head in with a piece of wood until she did not move anymore. He also informed them that he left Ashley somewhere in the northern part of Newton Township and then gotten rid of his bloody clothing. Harold David Hallman III was born on November 29, 1978. He had been living in Germany with his father in his early teens until he was a young man, but then his father left for Turkey and Howland stayed behind to live with his girlfriend. At that time, he appeared to be a normal young man. Nobody would have guessed that he would have grown up to be a serial killer. The first time Howland took someone's life was when he was 20 years old. Joseph Whitehurst, a 21-year-old son of an Air Force colonel, was living at a military base in southwest Germany. On May 30th, 1999, he disappeared and was found outside Ramstein Air Base. A few days later, he had been bludgeoned to death using a club that was found at the crime site. When German police captured Howland for an unrelated crime, he confessed to killing Whitehurst when he had started dancing around the campfire. Howland said that he felt threatened by Whitehurst, so he attacked him first. Howland also told the police. Howland said that he felt threatened by Whitehurst, so he attacked first. Howland also told the police it was the biggest rush I ever felt. Like your whole body. To this day, I don't know how many times I hit him, and then I was gone. Despite his confession, he was only sentenced to a 6-year term at a German reform school. According to German law, a person below the age of 21 has to be tried in a juvenile court. Besides, Howland was also diagnosed with schizophrenia at the time, which led to a more lenient sentence. He then came back to America and lived near Battle Creek, Lakeview, and the Fairfax Addition in Emmett Township, and was employed as a truck driver. It was around this time that he seemed to have a huge role in the disappearance of Ashley Parlier in 2005. Later on June 13, 2018, a mother of 2 children, Deanna Phillips, disappeared. When he was finally under arrest 3 years later, and police were interrogating him, he confessed that he hadn't actually wanted to murder Phillips specifically, but he wanted to kill again. Erica Schultz had doubts about meeting a person she had online conversations with. She knew him as Dave. On December 6, 2020, Erica was reported missing. Erica had autism and was a woman of habit. So when she did not show up, the police checked her phone records and connected Howland to her murder. In his confession, he casually mentioned that killing Erica Schultz was like just another day in the park for him. When he was arrested, he was found along railroad tracks in Duncannon, Pennsylvania, with a self-inflicted wound. He believed he needed to die for his sins. When Howland was receiving treatment in the hospital, he admitted to killing Schultz and Phillips. When he was in jail, he wrote a confession letter to his estranged wife, detailing how he had killed Phillips, who he had relations with. He said that he wanted to confess to the crime to highlight the fact that he would never do something like that with her. It obviously freaked out his ex-wife, who took the letter to the police. She also mentioned that Howland had claimed to have killed a woman earlier, but she had not believed him. The common characteristic of his crimes made him a serial killer. All his victims had disappeared. Every one of them had head injuries. He first attacked them and knocked them unconscious, and then he finished the job. He dumped the bodies to remote places without burying them. In fact, Phillips and Schultz were murdered on the same ground. Howland has been charged with kidnapping, criminal homicide in the cases of Erica Schultz and Deanna Phillips. Calhoun County Sheriff's Department Detective John Pignatro said that Howland was in a transient and without a permanent address in Pennsylvania in 2021. He blamed his family and unsuccessful marriage for everything that happened. He believed that there are alphas and there are non-alphas. That's just the way.
I mean, I killed him. I hit him in the head with a log and he died right there probably. I don't know exactly. It was dark. You know, we were sitting there by a campfire. I hit him hard, and I hit him multiple times.
There's the master and there's a submissive, or whatever you want to call it. That's the way life's built. So when his wife didn't submit to him, he had to look for that dynamic in extramarital affairs. After Parlier's death, Howland researched serial killers.
In a way, yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was a curiosity of mine, of course. It's part of the reason it happened, yes. That's part of the reason. And I did. Nothing, no drug can ever equate to that experience. Like, there's nothing out there. It's just, your mind is just, well, for me, it was just gone.
When he was asked about which homicide he remembered the most, he consistently answered that he remembered them all with vivid details of what he did to them. Police were sure that he was a serial killer.
That stems from my wife, because I know when my wife was interviewed by the police, she kept saying that I could have killed up to 10 girls or something stupid. I heard all about it. There are no others. I have a clear conscience.
Who had to be taken off the streets immediately. In fact, Howland admitted that he hadn't been caught, he would have killed again. Howland in his confession highlighted that he had met Ashley Parlier at a bowling alley where she had been with her parents. The court paper confession also highlighted that he initiated a conversation with her, which led to deeper relations later. When she had the argument with her parents,
it wasn't a goal of mine. It wasn't, let's see how many I can get away with. It wasn't like that for me. Like I legitimately did not want to do it again. And I legitimately had up,
She called Howland and then visited his place. Ashley informed him that her parents were insisting on getting a pregnancy test. He confessed that he was the father of the child that Ashley was carrying. He got enraged by their subsequent argument and knocked her unconscious. Then on the evening of June 13, 2005, he bashed her on the head several times and killed her. He said it was a field, overgrown middle of nowhere, Michigan, and it's 10 miles from town. There's like a garage close by or something, or a small house, but it was empty. We sat there. I sat there kind of in my own world. Ashley was in the back, just out. He consciously decided to kill her at that spot. When he realized that he had found a good enough place when he was sitting with Ashley's unconscious body by his side. He also mentioned, I was sitting there and no cars drove by. The longer I sat there, the more I thought this is a good place as any. Then it happened. I took her out and took her to the spot and finished the job. He hit her and watched her die. Once he was sure that Ashley was no more, he went home and took a shower. Later, he disposed of his clothing at his then place of work at Meyer, an American supercenter. What is even more shocking is that he followed up the case for years and years. He even went to check on Ashley's remains at one point, but only found bones. Upon further questioning, he came forward with an apology to the Parlier family. Howland denied having planned it out. He said he did not want that to happen with Ashley. He went on to say that he regretted Ashley's murder more than any of them. It should be noted that this confession was released in recent years, at a time when he had already taken multiple lives. Nicole, Ashley's sister, could not control her emotions when she got to know that Howland said that Ashley had gone over to him for help, and she was just confused.
Closure for her remains, but I try not to put my hopes in that with him, because to me, it's more of a power thing for him. It's one more thing he gets to kind of have over us as a family. The hard part is my parents didn't get to hear this. You know, there was always kind of a cloud of suspicion over them being the last two to see her. That was known. It's kind of coined the term, bonded by sadness. It's going to be hard to stand in that room with him, but at the same time, he's not going to have the power. Yeah, we're not going to allow it. I have to control how much space he has in my life, in my home, and he gets very little. We're going to remember our sisters. We're going to remember Ashley and Tiana and Erica, and not him. We're going to remember how they were good people who loved and were caring, and he's just going to rot.
She was horrified that despite this knowledge, Howland had murdered Ashley in cold blood. Howland believed that things had gone out of hand, and he lost control and killed her. On one hand, he said that he felt so bad after ending her life that he was drunk for 3 weeks straight. He wanted to forget that it had ever happened. On the other hand, he explained the entire killing process gave him a kind of ultimate adrenaline rush that could be compared with nothing. Nicole was disheartened to know that his apology was just another way of showing his heinous act off. She said, "It was really hard for them not knowing. My mother, her Huntington's, progressed very quickly due to grief and depression. My father was the same. Being a parent myself, I know what they were going through. It's hard to understand what type of person could do that. I could never imagine wanting to hurt someone that badly." Howland accepted that he could say no words to comfort the family, but he would be willing to beat up with a log if they wanted to do that. Nicole was not happy with the apology. She not only lost her sister, but also lost her parents, who died in grief and confusion. She believed that Howland took more than just Ashley's life, and it was the truth. The number of people Harold Howland had killed was more than just the number of his direct victims. Many of his victims' loved ones had passed away never knowing what happened to their family. Nicole made a social media page with the name Bring Ashley Home, through which she got in touch with the older sisters of the other Pennsylvania victims. They believe that they are bonded by sadness and have developed friendships. She said that the other older sisters of the other Pennsylvania victims are going to join Nicole when she gives her victim impact statement on behalf of the whole Parlier family on April 10th at Howland's trial. She said, "We're going to remember our sisters."
Kind-hearted, and that, unfortunately, that's what the kind-heartedness and trustworthiness is. How she lost her life. That's how Tiana lost her life, and that's how Ashley lost her life. They just wanted friends, and we're
going to remember Ashley and Tiana and Erica, and not him. We're going to remember how they were good people who loved and were caring, and he's just going to rot. It had been 18 years since Ashley left her house after arguing with her parents. She never returned home. After what happened to her, the police were determined to bring her back home. They turned over every stone possible to find answers over the years. So when Harold Hallman came forward with the confession, the police wanted him to show them the place where he had left Ashley's body. The officers in prosecution believed that the case of Ashley Parlier was a very emotional and very labor-intensive case. It had been almost 2 decades since the first investigative officers tried finding answers. Over the years that followed, multiple detectives were assigned to the Parlier case. When they couldn't find the answers within the city, they even traveled across the country to locate potential witnesses and find necessary evidence against the culprit. Sheriff Steve Hinckley informed the media in March that the officers had traveled to California, Maryland, and Pennsylvania to investigate Parlier's case. Calhoun County Sheriff's Department Detective John Pignatro, Detective Dave Huminga, and Detective Sergeant Chris Suarez of the Michigan State Police were part of the investigation team. Hallman led the police to a wooded area at a 6.5-mile road in Newton Township, which is south of Battle Creek. Almost 24 officers searched for Ashley's remains on March 30th, 2022. After they carried out the search for several hours, they could not find her body. People residing in the area informed the media that at the time of Ashley's disappearance, the area used to be farmland, but within a few years, the entire area was divided up and sold to different property owners. All the efforts by the officers went in vain. Hallman admitted that after all these years and the development that had happened in the area, he could not properly place where he had left Ashley. The police are still on the hunt to find Ashley's remains. Unsurprisingly, the man who had already killed 3 women and possibly more was afraid to get the death penalty. He was sentenced to 2 terms of life in prison. He was not granted any form of parole. In February of 2023, Hallman pleaded guilty to the second-degree murder of Ashley Parlier. He agreed to help Calhoun County Police find the remains of Ashley in the area where he allegedly disposed of her. It is part of the plea deal with the Luzerne County District Attorney's Office in exchange for not receiving the death penalty. He faces up to another life sentence in prison and is scheduled to be sentenced in April 2023. The Calhoun County Sheriff is still looking for any information that would be useful in Ashley Parlier's case and finding her body. If you know something, then contact the office of Calhoun County Sheriff at 269-781-0880. Every minute is difficult when a loved one goes missing. Imagine 18 years of hurt, grief, and sadness with only a tiny sliver of hope that someday they could return. Imagine the confusion about whether to keep waiting or just leaving the saddening experience behind. Ashley's parents, Cherie and Russell, died in the spring of 2020 without ever knowing what happened to their daughter. Imagine the pain and the agony they suffered in the end when they realized that they would never get to know what happened to Ashley, especially since she had left the house being angry with them. Imagine how they had to live their lives when everyone from true crime enthusiasts to police to the media had active suspicions against them about the disappearance of their own daughter. But Ashley's story finally received closure. Even if it was after 18 years, she may have not come home yet, as the police are still trying to find her remains, but at least her family knows what happened to her.
The night of July 23, 2010 was dark and gloomy in the quiet town of Independence, Louisiana, when tragedy struck. 22-year-old Jamin Robinson was discovered lying unconscious on the side of the road. Despite the frantic efforts of medical personnel, he passed away 2 days later. For years, detectives were left with no leads or suspects, leaving the community in a state of fear and uncertainty. But just when all hope seemed lost, a mysterious witness suddenly came forward with information that changed everything. What did this witness know, and how did it change the course of the investigation? Independence, a small town in Tangipahoa Parish, Louisiana, is located about an hour north of New Orleans and is home to a variety of historic landmarks. With a population of just over 1,600 people, it is a tight-knit community that values its rich history and Southern hospitality. The town is known for its annual Sicilian Festival, which celebrates the Sicilian heritage of many of its residents. It is also a popular destination for tourists looking to experience Louisiana's unique culture and history. It is here in this small and quiet town where our story begins. Jamin was born on March 31, 1989, in Independence, Louisiana. Although there is very little known about his early life, and details such as the names of his parents or the schools he attended remain a mystery, one thing that is known for certain about Jamin's childhood is that he had a sister named Chastity Jackson. Despite the lack of information about their early years, it was clear that the two of them shared a special bond that could not be broken. Growing up in Independence, Louisiana, the siblings relied on each other for comfort, support, and love, and as they grew older, their relationship only grew stronger. People who knew Jamin describe him as a sweet young man who was always beaming with joy and spreading kindness wherever he went. Everyone who crossed his path was struck by his infectious smile and warm heart. His gentle personality and quiet disposition made him a beloved figure among his family and friends. He also had a deep love for his family, whom he held close to his heart. But there was more to Jamin than just his kind-hearted nature. He was a gifted artist who had a talent for drawing. His sketches were a reflection of his boundless imagination and his ability to capture the essence of the world around him. Jamin was also a devoted member of his church community, regularly volunteering his time and resources to help those in need. Apart from this, Jamin also had a close friend by the name of Montre Page. Montre lived in the same neighborhood and attended the same school as Jamin. He was also well known by Jamin's family. Despite Jamin being 4 years older, the two got along quite well. There was no doubt that Jamin's days were filled with laughter, love, and endless possibilities. He had his whole life ahead of him, with plans and dreams that seemed like they would soon be within reach. But when they least expected it, things took a turn for the worse. July 23, 2010 started out like any other day for Jamin. He got out of bed and started his morning routine, completely oblivious to the fate that awaited him. As he went about his usual business, running errands and taking care of responsibilities, little did he know that he was completing a sequence of events that would ultimately lead to his untimely death. Perhaps if he had known what was going to happen, he would have chosen to remain indoors throughout the day rather than venture outside. Some minutes before 11 p.m. on that fateful day, an emergency call came to the Independence Police Department. The caller, who seemed to be in a state of panic, reported that someone was lying unconscious on Kem Street near a roadside ditch. It was unclear how long the person had been lying there, but the caller urged the police to hurry. The police officers on duty immediately sprang into action and rushed to the scene as fast as they could. When the police arrived at the scene, they were greeted with a chilling sight. A young man, barely clinging to life, lay motionless near a roadside ditch. Despite the absence of any visible physical injury or blood on his body, it was clear that he was in a terrible state. The officers' minds raced as they tried to figure out what could have happened to him. They began to suspect that the young man had been a victim of a hit-and-run driver, as there were no other signs of foul play in the area. Officers knew that time was of the essence and they had to act quickly to save his life. With the help of paramedics, they carefully loaded the young man into a waiting ambulance, hoping that he would make it to the hospital in time. With sirens blaring, they rushed to the Lally Kemp Regional Medical Center. Upon arrival at the hospital, the doctors quickly stabilized the young man and assessed his condition. The news was not good. He had suffered from multiple head injuries and his life hung by a thread. Knowing the gravity of the young man's injuries, the doctors transferred him to St. Tammany Medical Center, one of the best hospitals in the state. As the doctors and nurses worked tirelessly to keep the young man alive, more information about him began to surface. Shockingly, it turned out to be none other than Jamin. His family were soon contacted and they rushed to his side at the hospital. With hearts heavy with fear and anguish, they prayed and hoped for a miracle. But as the hours ticked by, their worst fears were confirmed. Jamin's condition was critical, and the doctors soon prepared him for surgery. The surgery was successful, but Jamin's recovery was slow and uncertain. The medical team decided to transfer him to the New Orleans University Hospital, where he could receive the best possible care. Despite the doctors' best efforts, Jamin's condition continued to deteriorate, and his family's hope began to fade. They clung to every shred of optimism, but deep down, they knew that they were facing the unthinkable. On July 25, 2010, just 2 days after his fight began, Jamin passed away. His family was devastated. They couldn't believe that he had been taken away from them so suddenly and in such a tragic way. The following day, after Jamin's death, the Tangipahoa Parish Coroner's Office scheduled an autopsy to determine the cause of his fatal injuries. The examiner's findings revealed that Jamin's death resulted from internal, closed head injuries. The injuries also suggested that the vehicle that possibly hit him was slow-moving, which only added to the mystery of what happened that fateful night. As the news of Jamin's tragic death spread, a cloud of sadness and confusion descended upon the quiet town of Independence. Detectives of the Independence Police Department wasted no time in launching a full-scale investigation into the incident. They were determined to unravel the mystery behind Jamin's untimely demise. They began to meticulously piece together all the events of that fateful night, hoping to find the answers. The detectives faced a daunting task and they were not sure where to start. Who was the reckless driver that had possibly struck Jamin and left him for dead on the side of the road? And if it wasn't a hit-and-run incident, what exactly had happened to Jamin on that night? These and many more questions plagued the detectives. As the investigation into Jamin's death continued, detectives made a crucial discovery. The person who found Jamin lying on the roadside was none other than his friend and neighbor, Montre. With this revelation, the police immediately turned to Montre for answers, hoping that his account of events could provide valuable insight into what really happened on that night. However, even after several rounds of questioning, the police were still no closer to solving the case. The mystery surrounding Jamin's death only deepened, leaving detectives more frustrated. Jamin was soon laid to rest. The funeral was attended by many who had known him and loved him. After the funeral, the investigation into Jamin's death continued with renewed vigor. Detectives interviewed numerous individuals, but nothing came of it. The authorities even asked the public for help, urging anyone with information to come forward. The passing of time did not ease the pain felt by Jamin's loved ones. Each anniversary of his death brought renewed heartache, and the desire for justice remained strong. Despite the trail going cold, the authorities never gave up hope of solving the case. Unfortunately, the investigation yielded no concrete leads, and the case eventually went cold. Around 2017, the case was reopened. However, the Independence Police Department once again found themselves at a dead end regarding Jamin's case. With limited resources and no leads, they knew they needed to help find a breakthrough. Desperate, they turned to the Tangipahoa Parish Sheriff's Office for assistance. The Sheriff's Office then stepped in, bringing their expertise to the table in a bid to unravel the mystery behind Jamin's tragic death. Around this time, Detective Mike Sticker took charge of the case and began working tirelessly alongside Independence Police Chief Frank Edwards. The two men and several other detectives spent countless hours poring over the facts, determined to find any new leads that could potentially bring justice for Jamin. They believed that the community held the key to solving the case, and so they once again turned to the public for help. Police Chief Frank, in particular, remained hopeful that media coverage of the case would jog someone's memory or conscience and encourage them to come forward. 6 long years later, in January 2023, the breakthrough in Jamin's case finally came when a mysterious witness, whose identity was kept confidential, stepped forward. The witness had been carrying a heavy burden of guilt and finally felt compelled to come clean. His story was nothing short of jaw-dropping and took the investigation in a completely different direction. According to the witness, Jamin's death had not been caused by a hit-and-run driver as previously thought, but by someone close to him. The individual told police that the person responsible for Jamin's death was his friend Montre. While the exact details of the witness's account are still undisclosed by detectives, the gravity of Montre's actions were finally revealed. Following this, detectives began to look for him. His whereabouts were finally traced to Chambers County, Texas, and on February 10, 2023, officers finally arrested him. Even though he had been 17 when Jamin died, authorities decided to charge him as an adult. Up until 3 years ago, once you reached the age of 17, you were considered an adult offender in the state of Louisiana, said Tangipahoa Parish Sheriff Jimmy Travis. Montre was charged with second-degree murder, multiple failure to appear counts, and 1 charge of jumping bail. As it turns out, Montre's legal troubles seem to have started long before he became a suspect in Jamin's murder. He had been previously arrested and had pleaded guilty to multiple drug charges. This was back on November 16, 2021. At the time, the court had ordered him to wear an ankle monitor and return for sentencing 3 days later on November 19th. However, instead of complying with the court order, Montre decided to flee to Chambers County, Texas, and also removed his ankle monitor illegally in the process. News of Montre's arrest for the murder sent shockwaves through the community, especially to Jamin's grieving family. At first, they could hardly believe it when they heard that their son's own friend was responsible for his tragic death. But as the reality set in, a sense of relief washed over them. The rest of the community also struggled to come to terms with the truth behind the case. It was a betrayal that cut deep, and people wondered how something so senseless could happen between 2 friends. Many were left with lingering questions and a sense of unease, but above all, there was a collective hope that this would bring closure for everyone involved. On February 27, 2023, Montre pleaded guilty to several charges in the drug-related case and was sentenced to 90 years in prison. At the moment, he is also awaiting trial for the murder of Jamin. After a long investigation, the truth behind Jamin's death finally came to light. Thanks to the perseverance of law enforcement and the bravery of a witness who came forward, justice was served. While nothing can bring back Jamin, his family and the community can finally have closure and begin to heal. But what do you think would have happened if the witness had not come forward with the information that Jamin was murdered by his friend Montre, instead of being a victim of a hit-and-run? On the quiet evening of October 19, 2004, a 28-year-old mother named Keysha Brown was found lifeless in her home in Las Vegas, her body battered and violated. The police were left with a thin trail of evidence and no suspects in sight. The case eventually went cold, but the detectives never forgot Keysha. Several years later, the hunt for her killer reignited, and DNA technology helped shed new light on the investigation. So who was this ruthless murderer? And what was their motive behind this killing? Las Vegas is a city that never sleeps. It is the most populous city in the state of Nevada. With its iconic casinos, world-class entertainment, and endless nightlife, it's no wonder that this desert oasis has become a playground for adults seeking thrills and excitement. But beyond the glitz and glamour lies a fascinating history. From the early days of mobsters and showgirls to the modern-day transformation into a global entertainment capital, it is within this fascinating city that a brutal murder case unfolds. Keysha was born in the mid-1970s, but much of her life is shrouded in mystery. There is not much known about her early years, as there is scarce information about her parents' names, the schools she attended, or whether she had any siblings. But what is certain is that she was a young mother living in a modest apartment on the bustling East Flamingo Road in the year 2004. Her daughter Kalia was her pride and joy, and she would do anything to ensure her little girl had a better life. What exactly Keysha did to make ends meet is also unknown, but what is evident is that she was a survivor, a woman who refused to let life beat her down. At the time, Keysha was also in a relationship with a man who was only identified as her boyfriend and whose connection to Kalia remains unknown. The events of October 19, 2004, which was a Tuesday, would forever be etched in the memories of those who knew Keysha. That day, witnesses saw a stranger arrive in a red sedan and park outside her apartment. No one knew who he was or what his intentions were, but he wasted no time in entering Keysha's apartment. It is not clear where Keysha's daughter was at the time, but she was not around and was safely away from the apartment. For several minutes, the man was inside, and then he finally emerged with a duffel bag in his hand. He darted back to his car, started the engine, and sped away into the night, leaving a trail of speculation in his wake. Those who saw him would later describe him as a black male with a stocky build. Some 7 minutes before 7 p.m., Keysha's boyfriend made his way to her apartment, eager to see his beloved. But when he knocked on the door, there was no response. Frowning, he tried the doorknob, and to his surprise, it turned easily in his hand. With a sense of foreboding, he pushed open the door and entered the apartment. Silence greeted him, and his voice echoed through the empty apartment as he called out for Keysha. But there was no response, and this was when his anxiety began to mount. With each passing moment, he searched the apartment, moving from room to room. It was in the bathroom that he found her, lying motionless in the bathtub, concealed beneath a pile of clothes. With a jolt of shock, he realized that something was very wrong. She wasn't moving, and as he leaned in closer, he could see that she wasn't breathing. He could also see blood and realized that she had been stabbed. He checked for a pulse, but there was none to be found. Keysha's boyfriend's heart raced as he realized the gravity of the situation. He knew he had to act fast if there was any hope of saving her, and so he raised an alarm. Within moments, concerned neighbors started streaming into the apartment, alerted by the commotion. The minutes that followed were a blur of chaos and confusion as multiple people frantically called the emergency line to report what had happened. Time seemed to stand still as they waited for help to arrive. At 7:13 p.m., the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department was informed of the incident and rushed to the apartment. They were joined by paramedics who arrived at the scene, but it was too late. Keysha was beyond saving. Her body was carefully removed from the apartment and taken for an autopsy. The moment detectives arrived at the crime scene, they knew they had their work cut out for them. They meticulously collected DNA evidence from the scene, which they stored away, knowing it could be the key to unlocking the mystery. They also began questioning anyone who might have seen or heard something, including Keysha's boyfriend. It was during one of these interrogations that they heard about the strange man in the red sedan who had been seen visiting Keysha's apartment from eyewitnesses who had seen him. The detectives couldn't shake the feeling that this man was involved in Keysha's death, but all they had was a vague description of the man's appearance. No one had been able to get a good look at him, and there was no surveillance footage in the area to help them identify him. But the detectives refused to give up. They combed the neighborhood, knocked on doors, and talked to anyone who might have information. They knew that every lead, no matter how small, could be the key to solving the case. The results of Keysha's autopsy were soon revealed, and the findings were nothing short of disturbing. The Clark County Coroner's Office, which conducted the autopsy, concluded that she was strangled to death in a brutal homicide. But that wasn't all. The autopsy also showed that Keysha had been assaulted, stabbed, and beaten. The news sent shockwaves through the community as people tried to come to terms with the brutality of the crime. The hunt for the perpetrator continued, with law enforcement leaving no stone unturned in their pursuit of justice for Keysha. As they worked tirelessly day and night to solve the case, the detectives couldn't help but wonder who the mysterious man was and what he knew about Keysha's untimely demise. Despite their relentless efforts, the case remained unsolved, leaving Keysha's family to mourn their loss and grapple with the question of who had taken her life so viciously. As time went on, the case went cold. After years of gathering dust, Keysha's unsolved case finally got a second chance when it was assigned to the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department Homicide Cold Case Unit. In August of 2022, the department decided to do a review of the case, bringing together some of the most experienced detectives to work on it. As the team began to sift through the details of the case, Detective Dan Long discovered a new lead that had previously been overlooked. He recognized a pattern that he had come across in some cases he had investigated back in 2005. Detective Dan had previously worked on a case that involved the murder of 3 unrelated young women on different occasions. The 3 women were murdered in a similar manner, and their bodies had been left in the same way. A man by the name of Norman Flowers had been the culprit in all 3 cases, and he was currently serving 3 life sentences in prison. Norman's criminal history was a chilling and gruesome tale of terror. During the first few months of 2005, he embarked on a spree of burglaries that turned into violent attacks. His first known victim was 18-year-old Sheila Quarles, the daughter of his ex-girlfriend Deborah Quarles. Norman had spent a total of 10 years in prison and had been paroled twice. It only took him about 20 days after his last release to murder Sheila. On March 24, 2005, he barged into Sheila's apartment and viciously assaulted her in the bathroom. He brutally beat and then strangled her to death. To add insult to injury, he left her body face up in the tub, which was filled with scorching hot water. Before fleeing the scene, he took her cell phone, bank card, and jewelry. In the weeks that followed, Norman played the role of the supportive ex-boyfriend, even going so far as to recommend counseling to the bereaved Deborah. Little did she know, the monster responsible for her daughter's murder was right under her nose. On May 4, 2005, more than a month after the incident, Norman struck again. This time around, he targeted not 1 but 2 women in the space of just 8 hours. First, he broke into the apartment of Marilee Coote, a 45-year-old woman who had the misfortune of crossing paths with a depraved criminal. Norman bludgeoned, assaulted, and ultimately strangled her to death. But he was not done yet. As the night wore on, he descended on another apartment belonging to the 25-year-old Rena Gonzalez. Like Marilee before her, Rena was no match for the viciousness of Norman's attack. She was assaulted and strangled with a telephone cord. Norman was interviewed by the police a few days later, but he denied any involvement in the gruesome murders. His lies, however, were no match for the power of forensic evidence. With the help of DNA that was found on Marilee's body, detectives were able to catch him. On June 6, 2005, his reign of terror came to an end and he was arrested and charged with the murder of Marilee. The evidence against Norman was overwhelming, and the authorities were also able to link him to the murders of Sheila and Rena. In 2008, Norman went to trial for the murder of Sheila. Prosecutors pushed for the death penalty against him, but Norman's family members pleaded with the jurors to spare his life. Despite his family's testimony, the jurors found Norman guilty and sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In August 2011, he received 2 more life sentences for the murders of Marilee and Rena. Detective Dan's heart raced as he pored over the details of Norman's grisly crimes. He felt deep down that Keysha's unsolved murder was somehow connected to this man. He knew that he needed concrete evidence to make an arrest, and DNA testing was the only way to confirm his suspicions. With a sense of urgency, Detective Dan quickly packaged up the evidence from Keysha's case and sent it off to the DNA lab. He couldn't wait to get the results back. The thought of finally bringing closure to Keysha's family after all these years drove him forward. It's not been disclosed which pieces of evidence were sent for testing. The days turned into weeks, and Detective Dan and the rest of his team grew increasingly restless. They knew finding Keysha's killer was crucial, not just for justice but for their own peace of mind. Finally, on December 21st, 2002, the call they had been waiting for came in. The results were in, and they were conclusive. The evidence from Keysha's case was a match for Norman's DNA. After years of searching, they had finally caught their man, and they could hardly believe that he had been right under their noses all the while. With the available evidence, it also became clear that Keysha had been Norman's first victim. After this, the detectives began to formulate a plan to bring Norman to justice for the murder. They didn't have to look for him since he was locked up at the High Desert State Prison in Nevada, where he was serving his 3 life sentences. On February 23, 2023, the detectives secured an arrest warrant for Norman. The charges were severe, and this included open murder with a deadly weapon, sexual assault with a deadly weapon, and burglary with a deadly weapon. The detectives were determined to make sure that Norman paid for his crimes against Keysha, no matter where he was. As the news of Norman's arrest spread, a police briefing was held on the same day. Keysha's family was invited to attend, and her daughter Kalia arrived with a heavy heart, visibly shaken and emotional. With tears streaming down her face, she expressed gratitude towards the police force for providing her with a sense of closure. Keysha's murder is a tragic reminder of the dangers that can lurk in our communities. Despite the devastating loss, Detective Dan and his team's unwavering dedication to finding justice brought some measure of comfort to Keysha's loved ones. But the case also raises questions about the failings of our justice system and the need for better prevention and rehabilitation programs to prevent such tragedies from happening in the first place. So, how do you think we create a safer society for all? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section. The summer night of August 6, 1975 was supposed to be a fun night out for 17-year-old North Webster native Laurel Mitchell, but she mysteriously disappeared after leaving work at around 10 p.m. As the hours ticked by, her loved ones grew increasingly worried until their worst fears were finally realized. Laurel's lifeless body was found the following day floating in a river. This tragic incident left her family and friends devastated and the small town in shock. For years, the case remained unsolved until new evidence emerged. So, what happened to Laurel on that fateful night? Who could have hurt the teenager? And what was their motive? The case will take us to North Webster, a charming town located in Cossiaco County, Indiana. It is known for its picturesque lake views and recreational opportunities. The town is home to the North Webster Community Public Library, which is a hub of activity for residents and visitors alike. Additionally, it features several parks, including the popular North Webster Town Park, which has a beach, picnic areas, and playgrounds. Laurel was born on the 24th of May in 1958 to Richard Mitchell and Wilma Mitchell in the town of North Webster. She had an older brother named Bruce Mitchell and a little sister named Sarah Mitchell, whom she was 5 years older than. Despite the occasional sibling rivalry, Laura and her siblings had a tight-knit bond that only grew stronger with time. Laurel grew to become a beloved figure in the community, where her warm smile and friendly nature won over the hearts of everyone she met. One of her most endearing qualities was her unwavering kindness and caring nature. She had a heart of gold and always went out of her way to help others and make them feel loved. The neighborhood children were particularly fond of Laurel, and it wasn't uncommon to see her surrounded by young children, all clamoring for her attention and affection. Laurel had many talents, but perhaps her greatest passion was music. From a young age, she had a natural gift for singing, and so it was no surprise that she was a key member of the local church choir. But Laurel's love for music didn't stop there. She was also an accomplished dancer who honed her skills by taking lessons at a local studio. For Laurel, music and dance were more than just hobbies, they were a way of life. They gave her a sense of purpose and fulfillment that nothing else could match, and she poured her heart and soul into every performance, no matter how big or small. At the age of 17, Laurel was set to begin her senior year at Wawasee High School. However, before the new school year began, she decided to take up a job at the Cokesbury Inn, a small restaurant located in Epworth Forest. For her, working at the restaurant was a perfect opportunity to gain valuable experience while earning some extra money. She was determined to make the most of every moment, and with this attitude, she threw herself into the job with all the energy and enthusiasm she could muster. In no time, she had become a favorite among the staff and the customers. By 1975, Laurel was living life to the fullest. She had a job she enjoyed, friends she loved spending time with, and a bright future ahead of her. But unbeknownst to her, fate had other plans. As the sun rose on August 6, 1975, the Mitchell family began their day, unaware that a life-changing tragedy was waiting just around the corner. Laurel, Sarah, and a friend of Laurel's who was staying over with the family got up early and eagerly tackled their morning chores. Bruce, the elder brother, was not home at the time because he was already married and serving in the Army in California. Soon, Richard and Wilma left for their respective workplaces after bidding their daughters goodbye. By mid-afternoon, Laurel also set off for work. She arrived at the Cokesbury Inn in time for her shift, ready to take on the day with a smile on her face. As she greeted customers and went about her duties, time seemed to fly by. Before she knew it, the clock struck 10 p.m., signaling the end of her shift. Earlier that day, she had made plans to meet up with some of her friends at Adventureland, a popular amusement park located just half a mile away from her workplace. And so, when a coworker offered to drive her home after work, she politely declined. At around 10:15 p.m., Laurel said her goodbyes and stepped out of the bustling inn. The night was cool and quiet, with only the sound of crickets chirping in the background. The anticipation of spending a thrilling evening with her friends kept her energized as she walked towards Adventureland. As she walked away from the inn, she was swallowed by the darkness, never to be seen alive again. Meanwhile, Laurel's parents were oblivious that something bad had happened and believed that she was just out having a good time with her friends. Her friends, on the other hand, assumed that she had gone home after work since she did not show up. For some reason, they also decided to change their plans and headed over to a county fair in Warsaw instead of the amusement park. At around midnight, Laurel's friend returned to Richard and Wilma's home. She had been part of the group Laurel was supposed to meet up with. Wondering about Laurel's absence, the friend's shock turned to alarm when she realized she had never made it home. The friend then explained to Laurel's parents how the night had gone and how Laurel had never shown up for the planned outing. Their hearts sank after they heard all that Laurel's friend had to say. They knew in their gut that something was amiss. Laurel was always responsible and would never stay out past curfew without letting them know. Both Richard and Wilma exchanged worried glances, trying to think of what to do next. They decided to give it some time and wait for Laurel to return home. But as the minutes turned to hours, their anxiety grew, and they knew they couldn't just sit and wait any longer. Something had to be done. A few minutes past 4 a.m., they called the police and reported that Laurel was missing. The dispatcher took their information and promised to send a unit out to their home to take a report. As the sun began to rise and the night turned to dawn, news of Laurel's disappearance spread quickly throughout the neighborhood. Concerned neighbors and friends gathered together to search for her by combing through the woods and checking roadsides. Back at home, Laurel's younger sister Sarah woke up and was deeply upset when she discovered that her sister was not at home. Although she was supposed to attend a softball practice that morning, she was in no mood to do so. Her parents, however, urged her to go, and so she left home with a heavy heart. That same morning around 10:30 a.m., a fisherman named Glenn Dixon and his son Hager set out on the Elkhart River hoping to catch some fish. The river was about 15 miles away from Laurel's place of work. As the fisherman and his son were about to begin fishing, they suddenly spotted a fully clothed body floating in the water. They approached it, and upon closer inspection, they realized that it was a dead body that had likely been floating for a while. It was a shocking discovery and a gruesome start to their day. Within minutes of finding the body, the fisherman and his son contacted the authorities, and soon the once peaceful riverbank was swarming with police officers. Everyone was determined to find out the identity of the victim and what had happened to her. The air was tense with anticipation, and after what seemed like an eternity, the officers finally discovered that the victim was none other than Laurel, the young teenager who had been reported missing by her distraught parents just hours earlier. Soon after, her body was taken away for an autopsy. A few moments after the discovery of the body, a convoy of police vehicles pulled up outside Laurel's parents' home. Richard and Wilma were anxiously waiting for any news of their daughter's whereabouts, but they were not prepared for the news that was about to be delivered to them. As the officers told them what had happened, Richard's eyes filled with tears, and he let out a heart-wrenching cry. Wilma as well was inconsolable. When Sarah arrived home from her softball practice not too long after, she could sense that something was not right. She found it strange that there were multiple police vehicles in the driveway. With a growing sense of unease, she hurried inside to find her parents in tears. The look on their faces made her heart drop. With a shaky voice, her father broke the devastating news that her beloved sister Laurel was dead. From that moment, Sarah's world would never be the same again. Days after Laurel's body was discovered, the results of her autopsy were released. The report stated that she had died by drowning, but there were no apparent signs of trauma aside from bruises on her hands and shoulder. To make matters worse, the report also revealed that she had been abused. The news sent shockwaves throughout the town, and people began to question who could have committed such a heinous act. An investigation was immediately launched by the authorities, and they worked tirelessly to solve the mystery surrounding Laurel's tragic end. With many questions unanswered, detectives began to conduct interviews with potential witnesses. One such witness, a man named Frank Overmeyer, came forward and shared a revelation. He claimed that on the night of Laurel's disappearance, he heard what sounded like the trunk of a car being slammed shut. He suspected that the vehicle in question was an Oldsmobile. This statement by the witness would not make much sense to detectives until several years later. Now, at the time of Laurel's death, detectives collected and stored the clothing and belongings from her body. These included a silver necklace, one earring, shoes, undergarments, a sweatshirt, and blue jeans that were unzipped and unbuttoned. Unfortunately, due to the lack of technology at the time, there was little that could be done with the clothing. However, it was only a matter of time before advancements in forensic technology would breathe new life into the investigation. Laurel's funeral was held at a large church in the heart of the town, and it was attended by an enormous crowd of well-wishers, friends, and family members who had come to pay their respects to the young woman who had been taken from them far too soon. "I don't remember the sermon at all," Sarah said. "I just remember sitting between my dad and my brother, and they were both squeezing my hand so hard." The investigation into Laurel's death intensified after her funeral, with detectives from multiple state and local agencies working round the clock to solve the case. They combed through evidence and interviewed many more individuals, but all their efforts were in vain. No one could figure out how Laurel had met her end, and her family was left in the dark with no answers. As weeks turned into months, and months into years, the case slowly faded from the headlines and went cold. But for Laurel's family and friends, the pain of her loss remained. In 2007, Indiana State Police Captain Kevin Smith was assigned as the lead investigator on Laurel's case. He was a man on a mission and was determined to provide the answers that had eluded Laurel's family for so long. The pressure was on, but Captain Smith knew that he would do whatever it took to give Laurel's loved ones the closure they deserved. But despite his best efforts, no new leads or evidence surfaced for several years, leaving him and his team frustrated and discouraged. Hope began to dwindle, and the case seemed destined to remain unsolved forever. Laurel's parents, Richard and Wilma, never stopped working to keep their daughter's case in the public eye, hoping that someone would come forward with information that would lead to an arrest. But as time passed, the couple's health began to deteriorate. In 2012, tragedy struck once again, and they passed away just 4 months apart, without ever seeing justice for Laurel. It was a heartbreaking end for a couple who had dedicated their lives to seeking answers and closure for their daughter. Despite their passing, the memory of Laurel lived on, and her case continued to be investigated by the authorities. In 2013, detectives received a surprising lead. A woman named Renee Sexton stepped forward to provide a piece of vital information. She revealed that when she was only 16 years old, she had attended a party with a man named John Lehman in 1975. During the car ride home, John had made a startling confession to her. He revealed that he and a friend called Fred Bandy had committed a murder. However, he did not disclose any details about the crime they had committed. Detectives were intrigued by this piece of information and believed that it could be related to Laurel's case. In 2014, a year after Renee's account, detectives received another tip, this time from a man named Bill McDonald. Bill had been a high school sophomore in 1975 and claimed to have met Fred at a party shortly after Laurel's death. During their conversation, Fred had allegedly boasted about committing a crime around the area where Laurel's body was later found. This new development made detectives hopeful, and it prompted them to take a closer look at both Fred and Lehman as potential suspects. They dug deep into the two men's past, but their search yielded nothing significant on Lehman. However, this was not the case for Fred. They discovered that he had been in trouble with the law before. In 2001, he pleaded guilty to abuse and contributing to the delinquency of an individual. It was an unsettling discovery that left the detectives wondering if this was just the tip of the iceberg. They knew they had to keep digging if they were to uncover the truth about Fred's possible involvement in the murder. In 2019, the items of clothing and belongings collected from Laurel's body were taken out of storage and re-examined by Captain Smith. With cutting-edge technology and modern techniques now at their disposal, he was hopeful that they could finally unlock the secrets hidden within these items of evidence. With this, he submitted some of Laurel's clothing to the state laboratory for DNA testing. Forensic scientists worked diligently for several weeks to analyze the evidence, and in the end, their hard work paid off. They were able to produce a male DNA profile found on the clothing. The discovery brought renewed excitement to the case, and detectives couldn't help but wonder if this was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. With the help of the DNA profile, Captain Smith and his team were able to eliminate some of the other suspects they had been looking at and narrowed their search down to only 2 individuals on their radar, Fred and Lehman. In December 2022, detectives set off on a mission to Fred's residence, which was located in Indiana. They were determined to get a DNA sample from him. Upon their arrival, they were greeted by Fred, who seemed oblivious to the reason for their visit. The detectives took a deep breath and explained to him why they were there. To their surprise, he did not put up any resistance and even offered to provide a DNA swab voluntarily. After the DNA sample was obtained, the detectives thanked Fred for his cooperation and left his house. On January 13th, a long-awaited breakthrough in the case arrived. The DNA analysis on Fred's sample revealed a match that was beyond the detectives' wildest dreams. The probability of him being the source of the DNA found on Laurel's clothing was a staggering 13 billion times higher than anyone else. The detectives were ecstatic with the news, knowing that they were closer than ever to solving the case that had haunted them for nearly 5 decades. Armed with DNA evidence that linked Fred to the crime scene, they quickly obtained a warrant for his arrest. But their work didn't stop there. They knew they needed more evidence to build a solid case against him, and probably Lehman too. So they also secured warrants to search the homes of both men and collect DNA samples from Lehman. Detectives also discovered that Fred had owned and driven a 1971 Oldsmobile at the time of Laurel's murder. With this knowledge, detectives were able to piece together the horrifying sequence of events that possibly led to Laurel's death. They believed that Fred and Lehman had forced her into the car, driven her to the river, and then deliberately drowned her. It was a shocking and disturbing revelation that sent shivers down the spines of everyone involved in the case. On February 6, 2023, a team of detectives arrested both Fred and Lehman at their respective homes, and they were charged with first-degree murder. At the time of their arrest, they were both 67 years of age. When Captain Smith called Laurel's sister Sarah and her brother Bruce to inform them of the arrests of 2 men in connection to their sister's murder, they were surprised. They were grateful for the breakthrough, but also felt a pang of sadness as she wished her parents were alive to witness the moment. On February 28, 2023, both Fred and Lehman appeared in Noble County Court and pleaded not guilty, but the overwhelming evidence against them spoke louder than their words. Both men were then ordered to be locked up without bonds or the possibility of bail at Noble County Jail. They are scheduled to appear for pretrial hearings on April 24, 2023. As for Sarah, her heart still aches from the loss of her beloved sister, and although she knows that justice will be served, she admits that it may not be enough to ease the pain. "I'm glad they are going to be punished, that they won't be able to hurt anyone else, but she's still dead," Sarah said. The investigation into Laurel's murder spanned over 4 decades, and it was only through advances in technology and dogged detective work that justice was finally served. She will always be remembered by those who loved her, and her memory will serve as a reminder of the importance of seeking justice for victims of crime. May she rest in peace. Given the evidence presented, what do you think motivated Fred and Lehman to commit such a heinous crime against Laurel? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section. Do not forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe.